once again, dear friends, dear participants of our online conference, welcome to our second Zoom discussion within this international webinar school organized by us, by the Atlantic Council of Croatia, and sponsored generously by NATO Public Diplomacy Division. I hope you all enjoyed, and I see familiar faces here. I hope you all enjoyed yesterday's discussion on Western Balkan region, and you also feel inspired to continue the discussion. I'm admitting new participants at the discussion today in the next 1 hour, and it will be in relation of how global health crisis influences democratic values. Allow me to give a short summary of presentations that were relevant for today's discussion, and that you will hear how you see the issues, and we will hear actually you today, how you see that all of these issues related to global health crisis affect contemporary international relations. So Professor Filotto pointed to the problems that the pandemic brings in today's world, among which is huge recession. Stressing these problems, Professor Filotto also stated that the governments should work harder in order to communicate better with their citizens, to establish transparency, and that is very important for democratic principles, and bigger trust between these two sides. Solidarity as a value was shown in this pandemic as well. Dr. Svoboda had 5 points of his presentation, and conclusion can be summarized in a way that both EU and NATO are founded based on values, although sometimes interests prevail. Dr. Svoboda says that values and interests are interconnected, but interests should lay on values and principles. He also pointed out that Western Balkan countries should have strong ties with NATO and EU when solving still existing disputes in the neighborhood. Mrs. Gukadinovic put in a perspective public health and individual liberties, saying that the measures affect social attitude of people on cooperation, on trust in the government, etc. She asked a question at the end on how to approach protecting public health versus democratic values. And I see Karina is here. She will say her conclusion and maybe explain her conclusion that civil rights should lie actually in balance. I mean, the answer of all of this dilemma is in balance. Ms. Venkart, Stephanie Venkart in webinar 5, she had a presentation related to our topic today, so I will just briefly go through her presentation. Also talked about values and stressed disinformation as a problem, since trust between people and the government should be protected, and disinformation leads towards losing trust. So reflecting to the Western Balkan region, there were these kind of challenges even before the pandemic. So Ms. Venkart thinks that values should be stressed when Western Balkan countries are trying to approach EU and NATO. So briefly about what we heard, of course, very brief, what we heard in our webinars. And I open the floor now to you to discuss about maybe we can continue the discussion, since we heard that values lie sometimes with interest. And yesterday we finished our discussion with the role of media. How would you describe, and maybe when you take the floor, you can briefly say something about yourself for our young participants, and do you have any further thing to add from our yesterday's conversation about role of media, where we stopped, and how it affects this global pandemic, how it affects role of the state? Who would like to take the floor? No one? Shall I ask questions? Or hello, Professor Filotto. Shall I start with our speakers on this topic? And Professor Shalaya is also here. Or you would like to add something? Maybe Andrei. I see that when I see Andrei's name, it is actually Lazo Matovsky. So,
Yes.
okay. So Lazo Matovsky, maybe you can share. No, now I'm lost. So I see Andrei and I see Lazo, but never mind. When you take the
Actually,
floor, you say your
actually
name because I see your message, but I'm not realizing who is your son and who is you.
I renamed my screen, my name on the screen, so it should
So
say
now it
Lazo.
shows Lazo. Okay,
Yes.
great, great.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Begovic. It's a pleasure to join you. Good afternoon to all participants. Unfortunately, I was unable to attend yesterday's Zoom conference because actually we didn't have internet connection in the area where I live. There was a malfunction in the area, but however, I will be glad to join you today and tomorrow. Actually, I'm Besyan's colleague, Besyan Polozhani. We are colleagues from work. We work in the same institution, Language Implementation Agency of the Republic of North Macedonia. And I would also like to convey my greetings from Dr. Ilber Sela to you and to all participants.
Thank you.
Regarding the topic, of course, COVID-19 is something that is relatively new to all of us, which has a global impact. It affects the humans psychologically, but also economically, because various social interactions are limited. We have to wear masks. We have to, limit our movement, and etc. etc. Some habits such as shakes and hugs have already become strictly forbidden. I believe it was since December 2019 when in Wuhan in China, this pandemic has begun. And so far we are struggling to find cure for this disease, which really impacts us all globally and has also distorted the distorted many habits in the society. Our usual way of life has become unusual. So this is something new for us. It is an invincible enemy, health-threatening enemy, but powerful enough to substantially disrupt the normality in the society we live in.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe we can give the floor to our speakers so that they can open maybe the discussion from their point of view, since we had listened to their presentations. So Professor Piloto, if you would like to say a few words about this topic and maybe open some issues that could be interesting for us to discuss today and to hear the opinion of young people that are present in this discussion. Just briefly, if it's possible, so that they can ask questions additionally and ask your opinion and answer.
Sure. Thank you, Monica. Good afternoon to everyone. And thank you, Monica, for inviting me to take part to this webinar and to take part to the whole project, which is, in my opinion, seducing and stimulating to think together and to compare our different points of view. I have to say that first, this topic was focused on of course, the health emergency and how much it could affect democratic values, if I do not miss the meanings. And as a matter of fact, some observers raised the questions during the pandemic emergency and see how people and countries and states and administration, they react to that. Do they respect of course, the prerequisite of democracy before taking decision, or do they take sometimes authoritarian decisions that are not, of course, tolerated as a democratic approach. That happened in some countries, of course. The emergency gave to some administration the power to act as an emergency. In Italy, we had the government that got the power, and the president of the government, Mr. Giuseppe Conte, he started to sign some rules. It was called the Decreto del Presidente del Consiglio dei Ministri, and with these rules that approximately it was signed once per month. So in the last 5 months, we had more or less 5 rules, or maybe 4 rules signed by the government. And these rules was absolutely executive. That means this is what you have to do. The people must follow the instructions of the government, and this is why we have to react to that. But the opposition, the democratic opposition in Italy, of course, they raise their questions. They use their voice to tell to the government that they were disagreeing with the measures that the government was taking. And most of us thought that during such an emergency, it should be better not to create a huge democratic opposition, because we have to cooperate all together to fight against this invisible enemy, as Lazo was mentioning it. Lazo, you are perfectly right. It is an invisible enemy. And that's why we have just to cooperate not only inside of a country, but we have to cooperate also at the international level. That's why the international organizations are important, are very important. And we had also many criticism versus the World Health Organization, the institution of the United Nations, that was is still in the middle of a debate about the reaction that they had, the instruction that they gave to the different countries. We have, of course, an open question concerning the European Union, and then also NATO.
Yeah, but if I can interrupt, please, if we can maybe, we heard your introduction into the webinar, and now maybe just to be more specific about, just to give a summary of your presentation, so that we can open the floor for the discussion. And we have also Karina here, and maybe Professor Shalaya would also like to join us in the discussion. So sorry.
So you want me to sum up which was my intervention?
Just briefly, so that we can, concentrate on the discussion.
Good. So I said, but you can watch, of course, the video, which is already recorded. I said briefly that it was a huge emergency, and in my opinion, we should reduce opposition to the administration and try to find a new solution and cooperate in that way, in a creative way. Of course, I also have to say something about the international organizations, because sometimes they were not very reactive to the emergency, and we would have expected them to be much more alive in this. And I'm referring to the European Union. Concerning NATO, of course, NATO is taking care about political and military security more than health security, but NATO is also, as Monica was saying yesterday, a social dimension. So NATO might also be involved in this, mainly for the logistic point of view. This is what I think, but we can share our point of view and our opinions, and I'm more than happy to receive your questions. By the way, yesterday I had no time to say, but I was highly agreeing with what Slađana Lovrić said in one of the messages that she wrote on the chat. And she was raising some questions concerning the efficacy of some organizations and also of NATO in this framework. So I totally agree with her.
Yes, thank you, Professor Filotto. We really did have interesting discussion verbally, but also on chat, which is also taped. So it will be published as well, because it was really interesting point of views were also be able to be seen on chat. So Corina, if you are here, I don't see your face, but if you would
I'm here. I'm here. Hello, everyone. Unfortunately, I don't know why, but my video just doesn't work. So I will try to be interesting via this microphone.
Okay.
So as you already know, as a short introduction, my name is Karina Gukadinovic. I'm a vice president of the Atlantic Council of Republic of Croatia. I'm a lawyer and I'm currently finishing my postgraduate studies on diplomacy and foreign politics. As you can assume, and as you already know from my presentation, I'm focusing on legitimacy. Why? Because I'm a lawyer, and secondly, because I think it's the vital and maybe most important thing to respect in this time of COVID crisis. So why is it so important? Because without that, we are gravely jeopardizing and even suspending all democratic principles that are currently widely how to say, widely known in all democracies worldwide. So I would like just to point out some vital and some interesting points from my presentation. I talked about global crisis and national response, as you already heard. I talked about pandemics and democratic preferences. From this topic, we can conclude that COVID-19 crisis has a sizable effect on democratic attitudes. Then I pass to legitimacy as a must for all measures brought by all governments and executive powers worldwide as a response actually to this world health threat and crisis. And I concluded actually with a question that can be a starting point for all participants. And actually that question is, to sum it up, which one will prevail among protecting health and lives of people on one side and protecting democracy and fundamental rights on the other? As a lawyer, I must say that I think that the answer hangs in balance, and that as long as we act in accordance with all applicable legislation, we cannot actually endanger civil liberties and rights. So that's like a summary, and I'm looking forward to some further questions from our participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Corina. Yes, thank you for your summary of the presentation. Professor Shalaya Ilya, if you would like to join also this discussion with your aspect of whether, and if yes, how are democratic values jeopardized with this global health crisis? Or we can start the discussion. So unmute yourself to let me know that if you would like to. Okay, yes, Professor Shalaya.
Okay, it's always very hard to start discussion, and regardless, Stefano was icebreaker. I think that we have really to dig in more in the topic. I'm also very curious about further development in terms of democracy. I think that this is a state of emergency, and it's very hard maybe to live with the standard version of democracy. We have really to make a distinction between representative institutions, which are authorized for general rules and regulations on one hand, and on the other hand, we have to think about executive, because this state doesn't suffer of the possibility to have a huge discussion, huge democracy discussion about many things. So we have maybe to discuss aftermath about all things, maybe to pick up experiences and to know how to deal with some similar crises, dominantly pandemics, because there are something forecasts about new pandemics in very soon future. Also, we have some experiences with the SARS, with some other pandemics, and I think that we didn't have or we didn't analyze our previous experiences in order to make the behavior of politicians and responsible people more efficient in this pandemic of coronavirus. So it sometimes seems it is suspension on democracy, but we have to recognize that sometimes it's also there is not enough time space maybe to proceed some measures and to impose some measures. The experiences from Bosnia and Herzegovina, unfortunately, are very, very negative. There are some things that actually, during the analysis after the pandemics and after the first phase of this coronavirus pandemic, that there are some decisions which are not legally based. Regardless, they were maybe forced in order to make measures more efficient. On the other hand, there are few examples of corruption that are particularly with the procurement of some equipment, particularly for people who are in very hard conditions living with the coronavirus. So these are some challenges that we have to talk about, how to make the democracy influence through representative institutions more open, more transparent, but on the other hand, it must not be an obstacle, for instance, for some measures in order to deal with this emergent situation. And the question also which touch dealing of media with the crisis. Media are very important because all necessary information which are proceeded by institutions and also general atmosphere about creating public opinion which has to deal with the corona pandemic and many of these measures are unavoidable. Without media, it would be very, very hard to deal with situation. But on the other hand, I'm not sure that our editor teams and that our journalists were prepared or are still not ready, maybe for next phases for media. And that is the emphasis that we have to put in more efforts in the very soon future, maybe to create media more stronger and maybe more responsible for this situation. I think that there are space for very practical measures, very practical activities, but I think that, and I'm afraid that to say that we are still not ready to get to such appropriate efforts in that direction. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Miloš. This is very interesting. Yes, review of how democratic values are jeopardized and what is the role of media in all of that. Let's call it the process. Slađana, yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, actually, before Mr. Shalaya started to share his thoughts, I was actually thinking about the same, because media plays definitely really important role in kind of prevention of any misuse or abuse of the power that executives have. But it's also a bit problematic because media is actually creating kind of public opinion, and that's actually really narrowly really connected or really close to the kind of opinion that people already have, like on a way that they actually people are asking media to do something, and like on the other side media is actually delivering kind of information and so on. So it's really interconnected, but that's one thing, and maybe later on I will come back on that. But I was also I'm also definitely agree with Ms. Gukadinovic when she said that we have kind of dilemma, and we saw that during this crisis, in a way how governments or executives were dealing with the pandemic. But so we can say as Ms. Gukadinovic highlighted, that on the one hand we have a democratic principle, human rights, and so on, and the question actually where governments or executives should have the open hands, and on the other hand, yeah, this kind of like possible misuse or abuse of these principles these principles, pardon, in order to raise a power of the governments or any kind of executives. So yeah, they were also using the media, like governments. They were also using the media to inform people, like how they should act. So in Croatia, we really saw that we really start to follow like daily information that they were delivering us. But on the other hand, we also saw that different, maybe kind of not really popular or informal kind of media gave us an other view that actually, yeah, government is a bit misusing their power and all this pandemic. So yeah, I will say the media is really important. It's really hard to explain, but like it's up to us also to push the media actually to deliver us as much as possible true. So yeah, this is.
Yes, so if I may just interrupt here, and you can continue, of course. It says Dr. Svoboda said that there should be their like behavior should lay on values and not on interests, and that is actually the main point. So the truth is a value and not to serve to someone's interest.
Yeah, that's definitely right. But what I also noticed is that sometimes really government was not really in a position to say the truth, because otherwise we will have kind of panic. So they were also trying to balance how they should deal with crisis and in the same time inform us, but also not raise any panic. So yeah, it's really questioning, and I would say that this is also kind of challenge for us. It's also the democratic question, like how we will influence the media, and in the same time how we will actually read or see or take what media is offering to us. So it's not just from one side, it's actually really mutual. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Slađana. I would maybe like to hear if Martin or Andre from the NGO close to United Nations, how do you see this? Well, how do you generally view the topic of possibility of democratic principles being endangered, and maybe to reflect also on this role of media that we are talking now, how important it is when we talk about democratic principles?
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes.
Well, as we said yesterday, I think we all agree that media has a vital role in today's society, not just regarding the COVID, but also in democratization and in helping promoting ideas and values. As we said, we're trying to promote the United Nations sustainability goals and their values and equality. So how we're doing it through media, through the social networks, through other forms of media. They're all vital to promoting all the democratization. They're a very, very good tool for promoting democratization and their goals. However, it can also work on the other side as well. So it can also promote bad values and autocratic ideals, and it can. So we need to be very careful when approaching the media, because they're both sides. We can use it for good, but we can also use it in order to make the world not a better, but actually a worse place. So I think we do need to take that into account as well.
Okay. Asking generally, not you, Andre. but of course you can also reply. What do you think, whether the trust between public and let's call it government side, not literally government, but government side is lost in this pandemic, or maybe not lost, it's a harsh word, but maybe shaken, or as Ms. Venkert stated in her presentation, that trust between the government and the people should be preserved, especially in the Western Balkan region, where this trust is used to be, even before this pandemic, a little bit not stable.
Well, can I say something?
Yes, of course, of course.
Well, I think first of all, it depends on which country we're talking about. So it's on a country by country basis. For example, in my country, it was a bit complex because it was happening in stages. So in the beginning, I think everyone was, the public was trusting the government a lot regarding this.
Mm-hmm.
This pandemic. It can be seen that, for example, there were independent polls that said that our Minister of Health had a very good rating back then, and generally people thought that we are coping well with the whole pandemic. And then when there was a huge rise of cases, I think that with that also it came a bit of skepticism from the public regarding how we're coping with it. So it was a very, very different scenario, for example, and it only changed in 1 month. For example, if in April, in May, people were behind the government, then in June, July, they were a bit disappointed with how we're coping with it, especially when we had very strict measures. I think we had one of the strictest measures in the whole Balkan region, because at some point in time we had these curfews that we couldn't get out of our houses after 6 p.m. and something like that, which people didn't really take very, very lightly. And then so it was very difficult. It depends on which month we're talking, what's the situation. Now, for example, we still have a lot of cases, but I think that it's not the panic is not as big, and then that maybe people kind of lost a bit of interest in it, which is weird to say, but I think it kind of like took a back seat since now we have other problems, whether we should open schools, whether we should how to continue our normal lives, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost same problems everywhere. So if I can just point maybe to the international security again, and this losing faith in governments in Western Balkan countries, etc. Hi, Karina, your camera started to work. So what do you think when we are talking about Western Balkan countries approaching European Union and NATO, and has this situation or scenario that is still happening made worse this process of Western Balkan as a region getting closer to NATO and to the European Union? What's your opinion? Look, so this is what the whole webinar school is actually about, how this global health crisis influenced the international security through these channels and made it worse or made it better. I think we know the answer, but let's discuss about it. Someone has the opinion about it. What about Ljubka and Mevlude? You were active yesterday, or sorry, I see. Aha, Bruno. Bruno is probably, yes, he can join the discussion. He can hear us again like yesterday, and he has a few questions for anyone who would like to answer. And he says we can then go back to my question, but this is the question for the speakers, for Professor Piloto, Karina, Professor Shalaya, and Ilya if he's still here. What is the crisis management difference between democratic states, like from the European Union and more authoritarian states like China, especially during COVID-19 crisis. And then he goes further as he says that there is clear interest and benefit for the Western Balkan states that want to join the EU, but what is the benefit for the EU to enlarge on the Western Balkan region, which is a question very often asked, especially in the times of the recession caused by the COVID-19 that Professor Pilotto explained in his webinar. So Professor Pilotto, would you like to start with the reflection on these two questions from Bruno?
Yes, thank you, Bruno. Of course, my opinion is that the paradox is that the less democratic countries, they have more benefit during emergency, because very often we need to take very quick decisions, and very quick decisions that they do not, of course, expect to be approved by a parliament or by other groups of people. The leader has the need to take a quick and effective decision in order to protect the interest of the community. But this is at the contrary of the democratic countries. Democratic countries, they want always to control the decisions. And this sometimes is less effective. Going to the Western Balkans, I would like to give you two concrete examples that, in my opinion, were extremely interesting. It is not only due to democracy, but also to the interest. And Slađana was also raising the issue, and Milos Shalaya. Hello, Milos, it's really nice to see you here in front of the screen. They raised the issue of the media. Let's go back to what happened in France and in Serbia. So both in France and in Serbia, the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, waited to decide to take a hard decision of lockdown because there was the municipal elections in France. And they had the need to go to do the elections in order to get the results of these elections. So he waited, because if he had to take a hard decision for a lockdown, people, they could not go to vote. And that was on the contrary also of the public interest. The same happened in Serbia. President Vučić was accused to wait to take a decision because there was the need of the elections in Serbia. And the elections that Vučić won. So he knew that at that moment he could win the elections, but he waited to take decision to protect the health of the population. This is a concrete example of what happened. So very often, and I go back to what Karina was saying before, she's a lawyer, the interest of the health is not really corresponding to the democratic interest very often. And the balance sometimes is spending more on the political interest, the local interest, than to the health interest. And we can open this discussion also for many other countries, not only for China, Bruno, but also, for instance, let's go to Germany. I'm absolutely sure that Germany and France did not say the truth in the very beginning. Everybody knows that Germany and France, they were neglecting the problem, and they were hoping that the curve of the infection would slow down. And finally, it didn't slow down, and then they had to take also harder decisions. And that happened when Italy was in lockdown. I'm talking about the end of February, the beginning of March. Italy was the only country in Europe in lockdown. And in Spain, I remember you that on the 8th of March, it is the day of the women. And the wife of the Prime Minister of Spain, González, the wife was highly involved in the huge manifestation on the road for the right of the women of the 8th of March. And they did not take any sort of restriction. And that was a catastrophe for the explosion of the infection in Spain. That was a political interest on one side. That was the opposite of the health interest of the other side. So Spain, France, and Germany, they waited much more than Italy to take decision. So in Italy, we are quite happy about the fact that our government finally, they took a hard decision, because now the situation in Italy is much better than in France, in Spain, and in Germany, for instance. And we hope that also those countries will resolve the problem, but sometimes you have to take very difficult decision, and the government should have the necessary power to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. And before I ask Karina if you have something else to add, I just would like to have a message to Bruno that we miss you and we miss your comments. I know that you are not able to talk, but hopefully maybe tomorrow you can join us in person so that we can see you, because you are always very active and in conference. So Karina, the floor is yours if you would like to add something to this Bruno's question.
Well, yes, actually, we had one really interesting example of this in Hungary. As you already maybe know, Viktor Orban passed a law in March that allows the government to rule by decree, meaning that he suspended all legislation and all usual proceeding for decision making. Additionally, he introduced draconian fines for spreading fake news and breaking quarantine, with penalties of up to 5 years imprisonment. Now, when talking about extraordinary and interim measures, in order in order to deem them as legitimate, they need to fulfill some conditions. Firstly, they need to be temporary, meaning that we have to know at every time when do they stop and under what conditions. For example, in Hungary, only the prime minister was allowed to say, okay, that's enough. So no law, no bylaw, no legislation at all. It was his actually sole discretion. Secondly, such extraordinary measures need to be proportional. What does it mean? That means that they need to be objectively proportional to the threat that they need to encounter. We have one interesting example, not in Western Balkans, but however, I can mention it. Israeli Prime Minister used emergency to postpone his corruption trial and grant extraordinary domestic surveillance powers to the internal intelligence. So that is something that wouldn't pass normally in regular democratic existence and functioning. So I feel that it is really vital to emphasize, as Slađana also mentioned, the role of media. But not only media, like any media, like independent media. Also, I think that another factor that adds to the transparency of all taken measures, except media, is active legislative bodies. So, of course, we had a COVID crisis. It is highly contagious. We need to take all necessary measures, wearing masks, etc. But still, I think Parliament, for example, in Croatia, could actually function. And that is a few days ago in Croatia, we had a proceeding before the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court claimed that all measures taken in Croatia were actually constitutional. What does it mean? They were legitimate. They were taken according to provisions of the Croatian Constitution. So yes, independent media is something that I would like to really emphasize, along with active legislative bodies and also executive powers. So.
Okay.
That is
Thank you, Karina. Miloš, you raised your hand if you would like to take the floor.
I think that this discussion in terms of democracy is very interesting. I will raise some of my experience, which is not so young. I think it's even before this was in the Balkans. There is a question of anticipation and security challenges. I think that many of these issues that we are talking about, that it is possible to anticipate, particularly, and I will get back for a while for this Stefano's point, democracy and the role of representative institutions, they are controlling institutions. When we talk about security challenges and security threats, we must not say there are only hard power threats which are used to have for many thousands and hundreds of years. So But now we are faced with a very different challenges, very different threats, and we have really to anticipate which are dangerous and how to deal with all that dangers in society, taking account that we have democracy society, or we are building democracy society, that we need some emergency measures, and we have to make a list of that emergency measures and limitation of the level of all that decisions that have to be passed. And that is the reason that how could we avoid this situation that, like Madame Gukadinovic stressed with the Israeli prime minister. It is not a question of emergency. It is just a question of mismanagement of this emergency and maybe using something. That's the reason that we have to learn some things from this pandemic. Firstly, how to deal with the international organizations and how to deal with, for instance, in this case, World Health Organization, because we have a lot of disputes about the role of World Health Organization and their measures. On the other hand, as I stressed yesterday, we have to discuss about the activities of traditional actors, like traditional players on the theater of security, like state is, because without a strong state measures, it was very hard to talk about the efficient measures against this pandemic. So we have to find out some balance, how to deal with international system on one hand, on the other hand, what is the role of state, and particularly with some democracy capacities and democracy limits in terms of executive and in terms of capital management. So I think that it deserves some maybe more precise and more detailed analysis and how to deal with the similar situations in future. But anticipation is also one of these things that we have to take care.
Great. Thank you very much, Miloš. Yeah, a connection was not perfect, so I hope everybody heard you. I did, but if someone didn't now, they will hear now in the recorded tape. Yeah, very interesting discussion, and I would just like to. I'm looking now. Bruno is writing a new message, but I saw that he asked also, what does the EU and NATO? I presume he was mentioning, or if he didn't, I will include NATO. What is the interest of European Union and NATO to enlarge to the Western Balkan region? I think that is that has a very clear answer. Western Balkan is geostrategically very important region, not only for the European Union and NATO, but the world itself. We all know how geopolitically, I mean, what it means to the peace and stability, to keeping peace and stability, and therefore I again ask a question, although I would repeat my question that I had before, whether all of this crisis is distracting the Western Balkan countries in their approaching EU and NATO, because there are a few more minutes before an hour. We can go further than an hour in our discussion if you agree, but I would leave the floor now and open the floor again now to you participants if you would like to ask some questions that you would like to hear the answer from our speakers. So please feel free to ask whatever you are interested in, and don't hesitate to open the discussion with any ideas that you might think it's not maybe for this topic, or I don't know. Just feel free to ask whatever you think it is important for you and for your study and for your job that you are working at, etc. If no one is yes, Professor Pilota, I would, okay, if I may give the floor to Željko. He raised his hand, and then he might have a question, and then you can refer to that as well. Thank you very much. Željko, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question is, I'm Željko from Zagreb Faculty of Political Science in University of Zagreb. Is this COVID-19 pandemic going to produce any mass migrations from African countries to European countries? Because some experts say that it's going to be, there's a big possibility to mass migrations to be produced from African countries to European countries after this pandemic. So is there any possibility really? And can somebody answer my question? Thank you.
So Stefano, maybe if you can comment this and of course say whatever you were planning to say before.
First, so I comment what Željko said about the migration from Africa. This remains a huge problem for whole Europe, not only for Greece. As you know, Italy is in the front line with that. And very recently, maybe you observed that the EU Commission and Ursula von der Leyen, they adopted some new rules for the migration that are not so new because finally they conserved the previous rules, but they added something in order to push the other member states to share the burden of receiving some immigrants coming from mainly from Africa, but not only from Africa. In Italy, we have a lot of immigrants coming from Afghanistan and Pakistan and Sri Lanka. People that say that they travel walking with the train, a bus, car, and walking, and they arrive from after many thousands of kilometers from Asia to Europe. It's something unbelievable that is going on here, and daily the police is stopping people that are entering in our country without having, of course, the legitimacy to do that. So the pandemic has been maybe a bit slowing down this phenomenon, but it has not stopped that. So I think that in the next months we will have to continue to take care of that, and the government alone or the government within the framework of European Union, they will have to absolutely continue to take care of that. The second point that I wanted to raise, Monica, is about what you said. And you were raising the issue of the Western Balkans and the enlargement of both NATO and EU. Both enlargement, in my opinion, are blocked in this moment, not only because sometimes of the gap, I'm referring to the European Union one. The gap after the entrance, as you know, of Croatia, there was a moment of pause in the European Union. After 2013, we were mainly in the huge economic and financial crisis. So the European Union countries said we need then to approve day by day every candidature. But secondly, is blocked because also of the issue concerning Belgrade and Pristina. Yesterday, you were talking also about the very recent agreement in Washington. Personally, I don't think that this agreement will really resolve the problem. This agreement will improve the situation of the population because it's very important to stop any sort of trade war between Belgrade and Pristina. They need, of course, to provide prosperity, economic prosperity for the population. But the big issue, which is the political one, is Kosovo independent, yes or no? Nobody can answer. And as you know, for some countries, Kosovo is independent. For other countries, it is not independent. And the situation will continue like this. And the role, the fundamental role is the role of the United States of America. And I don't think that Donald Trump 3 weeks ago really took a decision. He tried to encourage the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. And as you may know, some citizen in the on the line that separate Kosovo and Metohija on one side from the rest of Serbia, there is a bridge over the lake, and they put a sentence to thank President Trump for encouraging the peace, which is very important because it's the local population that is saying that. But on the other side, personally, I don't see yet a true solution that will unblock the procedure concerning the enlargement of EU and maybe the enlargement of NATO. The enlargement of NATO in the area is only limited now to Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I don't think that both Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina in the next future will be candidate to enter NATO, honestly speaking. So mainly it's much more important the enlargement of EU, but even the enlargement of EU is stopped. You know that yesterday they should have met again in Brussels, the representative of Belgrade and Pristina, to go on, and they didn't, because now they disagree about the topic that they should discuss. So this is also a very important aspect that we have to take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pilotto. And we are now over 1 hour, so I promise not to be longer than an hour, not to take much of your time, but I would give you a chance to ask something or say something if you would like now to add a comment, and then we would need to close the discussion of today, and of course to invite you to join us tomorrow. So feel free to say whatever you still think that needs to be said for this conference today. Anyone? No. Okay. So I would like to thank you all for being here today, for taking your time and sharing it with us. It was very interesting discussion. Thank you for our speakers for their presentations. Thank you to our speakers who Professor Shalaya and Ilya who left earlier for joining us in this discussion today. And thank you all for being here and joining us in this debate about democratic values. Hope to see you tomorrow as well, when we will talk about Euro-Atlantic values and resilience as a core task of NATO. So thanks again, stay safe, and see you tomorrow at the same time, same place. Bye.
Monica,
Bye.
thank you very much for your work, Monica. I really appreciate your work.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.